Welcome to Tough Talk.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for
We're,
having me.
we're pumped to have you. So Tough Talk, it's an interview series where we ask smart people tough questions.
I
Tough
need that
questions.
hat though.
I know you do. We'll get you in. We'll get you in. We'll
I
get
love
you
it.
in.
So cool.
But we ask tough questions about personal growth, about running a business, about career growth, and couldn't be more excited to chat with you, Shizu.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I should probably ask some of those same questions to myself. So this is always a great opportunity to really honestly check in with myself too. So
Nice.
yeah.
Nice. The first one I want to dig into is so you've been the founder and CEO of Apothecary for about 2 years,
Yeah.
but looking at your LinkedIn, I mean, you've speaking of hats, you've had a lot of positions and a lot of roles, and one of them a banker. And I'm
Yeah.
curious if that career path, if at all, prepped you for running your own business.
100%. I mean, I think apothecary more so than probably drink. Drink was a very operational heavy, like raw juice company. So it was much more about logistics and cold chain supply. And I
Hmm.
think I struggled with that. And so that's why it took 9 years to like really kind of, I think the first 5 years, frankly, I was making all the mistakes and like,
Mm,
and raising money though, I think without that Goldman experience, people probably didn't take me as seriously if I were just a juice founder and didn't have that like Wall Street background.
yeah.
But more so in apothecary, I mean, I think your team probably knows this best is like,
Mm,
I kind of look at our analytics like a trader, right?
mm,
So
yeah.
a lot of performance marketing in my mind reminds me of my days trading equity and distressed bonds in the trading floor of Goldman Sachs. And I think that analytical brain combined with being able to make swift, quick decisions based on sort of trends and forward looking leading indicators and past indicators has kind of given me that skill set to be able to look at most things with an analytical eye. And I have to like turn that off though too, and like turn the
Mm,
Goldman Sachs off and be like, why did I leave Goldman Sachs? And then put my
mm,
like creator hat on and like brand hat on, because I think
yeah.
those can be actually opposing brain parts of the brain. Like one is an artistic mind and one is like the data and like the left side of the brain. So
Mm.
it's a constant balance, but in short, yes, it has certainly helped me. And we just closed our round of funding, which I don't think we would have been able to do also without that sort of negotiation and financial kind of experience that I had.
I'm curious about the data component because I think so much of growth really is, looking at the data. And one thing that I hear the tough team talk about for Apothecary quite a bit is attribution and
Yeah.
looking at multiple sources for that. So first click and last click when it comes to budget allocation. Was that a shift at all for you, or were you always kind of like, hey, we can't rely on that only last click? Like there's a larger story to tell,
Yeah.
or did that take some time to get used to?
It definitely took time to get used to. And I actually don't know if my language of that has also grown until this year post iOS,
Yeah.
because I don't know if it was as big of an impact before versus now, because we had that sort of time constraint. It has given me sort of that sort of like it's forced me actually to look at things in a little bit more of a different attributional lens, and
Hmm.
also look at things in a much more 360 system wide perspective of acquisition as a whole relative to revenue as a whole,
Mm,
versus I think in the
yeah.
past we used to look at ROI by channel, and now it's ROI by the whole system and the whole marketing funnel.
Hmm. Hmm. Grow the whole pie.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious. You mentioned the juice company that you ran, and
Yeah.
that it got acquired. Do I have that right?
Yeah. Correct. In 2019. And then I kind of ran it through 2020 as well for my earnout.
Is that the game plan for Apothecary and acquisition?
We are, I think I've always operated in the mind of like, I want to live my life in a good place every day. I'm not going to optimize for someone else's goals. And so if it happens, great. If we do things the right way, honestly, we just continue to grow and have high NPS, have high retention, our team is happy. I think that'll just kind of filter out in the energy of the brand, and people
Mm-hmm.
will want to be around that. And if that's
Hmm.
acquirable, great. I will
Hmm.
always have that financial brain, though, that the business is in a good financial shape. And so I certainly think we will always be a good target for an acquisition. Whether I take an offer or not is up to me.
Hmm.
And So we're interested always about talking to people. Like we're talking to we're talking to all the big brands lately, like Unilever, Colgate, P&G. They've all been around us. I don't think it's time for sure, not yet. But we're always open to exploring opportunities and conversations. I would also be opening opportunities to buy other companies as well.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Speaking of each day, my team likes to say that you act like a never stopping Energizer bunny. Like you're full of energy, and I need to know more about that. How does that happen? Is it like your morning routine, or like are you just born that way? How do you kind of keep that level of positivity and energy up?
I think it comes also from my Goldman trader days. I think I was wired from my first day. Actually, it probably comes before that. It comes from I was a bartender at night, and then I would be a lifeguard in the morning. That was how I
Yeah.
paid my way through college, and I would study during the day. So there wasn't ever really a time that I was trying to support myself because I had to pay my own bills. And frankly, I probably still operate in that place of a little bit of like that immigrant, like that you need to prove and like carve your own path. And because
Hmm.
I was Canadian and also like a minority and female, there's these extra things that I think have just caused me to create this routine in my life, frankly, that's like never stops.
Hmm.
And I have to check myself. And so I often take walks now during the afternoon while I do my calls. That way I can be outside, but a little bit more in a sane place of mind because I could otherwise have been up now already for 10 hours. And
Hmm.
so it's this balance, I think, between not overworking, but also loving the work that I do, that I'm always in it.
It's
Yeah,
one of
it's
the
the
reasons.
balance.
Yeah, I felt like I had to. Um, I left New York City, moved out to Colorado
Oh, wow.
as I started tough, and being in a there's so many ways to make it work in New York. I couldn't, but being surrounded by mountains and green things, man, it has a difference.
Oh, it really does. I call it forest bathing. In Japanese, we call it shinjuku, means
Mm,
just taking in and bathing in the forest, because just like
mm,
how the trees absorb the carbon dioxide that we breathe out, it also can absorb, in my mind, it absorbs a lot of toxic thoughts, false
mm,
beliefs that we might have, just like negativity in the world, that like it just absorbs and kind of gives us back good oxygen that we
mhm,
take in. And ultimately, I
mhm,
think as a leader, I think about what is the oxygen that I give to the team to breathe. And more, I try to do that every day. I'm not perfect by any means. And sometimes I wake up grouchy because I didn't sleep at all. But
mhm,
I do my best to make sure I'm like, okay, what is the oxygen that we're feeding the company today? Yeah.
mhm, mhm, mhm. That's a good perspective. A heavy responsibility, but a rewarding one.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Yeah.
I'm curious in the early days of Apothecary, maybe like pre-funding,
Yeah.
um, what were like, and maybe you had some experience from your previous businesses, but like, what were some of the like initial milestones that you knew you needed to hit to be like, okay, there's this is validated, we can build this, we can grow this. Like, how did you kind of think about like breaking up what sometimes feels like an exhausting goal of growth and revenue into like smaller milestones?
Honestly, that's probably a conversation I still have with myself today, is
Mm,
because, we've taken in investors and it's like this constant balance between growth versus like profitability, or growth at what cost? Not at all
mhm,
costs, but at what cost? And that what cost question, I find, is ultimately depends on that personal risk appetite. Like
mm,
how much are we willing to take that burn or risk investment based on the growth that we want to achieve? And I also think it depends on the appetite of our team. Like, I think if I'm being honest with ourselves, like, I don't know if our current team or myself is structured or has that appetite to be like a venture capital kind of like company. We
mhm,
have investors, but that doesn't mean it's always a VC type of investor. Like,
mhm,
we're not a tech company. And so we're just run differently. We're based more on cash basis than we are on this like vision.
mhm,
And so
mhm.
that's the kind of way I've been thinking about it. But in the very beginning, I mean, it was just literally myself and then Jen, who was part-time, which was crazy if you think about it. And it was really scary for me to spend $500 a day. That was actually
Yeah,
scary because we
I
didn't
believe
have
it.
money.
I believe it.
Yeah, it was really, really scary. Yeah. And with drink, with my first company, because we were so poor and never had money to raise,
Hmm.
I built those ads myself. And so that's why I think that experience has taught me at least to be in the role that I am, that I can at least speak a little bit of that language and understand what's going on in the ecosystem.
Hmm.
I definitely think that I wish that a lot, more founders had that experience or had that sort of bootstrap mentality, because I don't think it's celebrated enough, frankly, that you
Hmm.
should do it yourself. It's
Hmm.
always
Hmm.
more smart to outsource it or to like hire for that role. And I'm like, but then what is the founder learning?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
With early stage businesses, we get a lot that reach out to Tough. They're about to launch a product, and we write a lot about like before you hire an agency,
Mm,
read this.
mm,
Don't, most of the time we're like, don't do it. So I think it really comes down to stage. Like
yeah.
bringing out an agency or even an in-house hire, it doesn't make sense until you've at least like shown some sense of traction.
Right.
And we're big fans of like if a founder can do a little bit of do it yourself, find a little bit of traction, they're going to be more successful long term because you can then start to understand the components of a growth model and then
Right.
find the right fit for it
Right.
versus kind of trying different teams on.
Right. 100% agree with that. I mean, we went from, as you know, we went from like an individual consultant to then be more into the agency route. And, I think Tough was different. Of all the conversations that we had, we felt you guys were giving us honest advice. And most times I find agencies kind of pitch advice, and those are
Mhm.
very different things. It's almost like when you're told what not to do, you're like, that's much more respectful. And I've always respected that out of you and Richard. It's like you guys just had that like business mentality on of like, I don't know if this is good for you unless you're at this stage, kind of that. I
Mhm.
think it's always been really, really helpful.
It's that kind of idea I think that we take at times. It's like elimination is, optimization in its finest
Mm.
form. And so it's like half the time growth comes from the things that you put blinders on and decide not to do. And
Oh,
that's
that's
hard.
so interesting. I think you're right about that. I think a lot of investors and founder people on the outside of the business, while we say you should be doing retail, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And as a founder, we want to. And I think that's what happens with founders is like we want to say yes, and we often do, and say yes to everything. But I think as a
Hmm.
CEO, that's when you start to say no to things, because CEOs need to think about prioritization. And I
Yeah.
don't know if founders and CEOs, that's where I think the head starts to butt. And sometimes when
Hmm.
that same person is doing it, it leads to a little bit of friction too.
Hmm. I'm curious, you've mentioned it, so I'm going to ask. You just closed a funding round.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
Great. Well, it's okay. So the press release came out like what, a week ago. We
Yeah.
closed that in August. And so just like Shark Tank or like the entrepreneur elevator pitch, it's like, okay, it aired like, 6 months later. Like that was a long time ago. So the round actually closed in August. So we've been on our way and growing on our way. But the round itself, I feel incredibly proud of. I think it was a round that shouldn't have taken as long as it did, but because we were so meticulous in almost like the hiring process, we almost hired investors to be like going through this rigorous screening process and
Mhm.
being very nitpicky about who we wanted to bring on the cap table. I
Mhm.
don't know if I've ever said as many no's to investors than I ever would have thought I would. But we wanted to optimize for angel investors, founder operators versus funds, because I think you get the same value add that you get from an angel investor, maybe even more, frankly, than a fund. And
Mm.
often funds come with politics and often changes of calendars, and they're always traveling. And it's like, most times they don't even know how to run a business. And so that's kind of what we optimized for, at least in the stage of growth, despite the revenue or the size that we currently are in. Yeah.
I'm curious. Like it's taken a while for me as an owner to get to the no space, but I definitely feel like it's a skill I've gotten better at. So we're intentional as well about who we work with, and we say no a lot, despite being very humbled.
Yeah.
The people that come our way, I didn't gain that confidence until I really like stepped back and was like, holy smokes, I'm surrounded by a team that is smarter than me, stronger than me. Like they're here. Like we can say no to this opportunity. We don't have to grab everything that comes our way.
Right.
And but that was a shift because in our early days at Tough, it was like anybody please, somebody
Right.
please hire us. So it was so much
Right.
like, yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, we'll do that. And now I find a lot of strength in my team. Where does your strength come from, and in order to say no and be choosy with investors when there's probably like way back there that like, well, maybe we should do it.
Uh, I think in the first, to your point, in the first year, we said yes to everything, and
Everything.
it stretched us really thin. I don't know how many times I cried in the first year and a half of the business. I probably cried a lot. And so the opportunities that come our way now, I think about where I'm like, I try to think about everything now, whether it's actually a negative thing or something where we need to say no to, as if I had all the resources in the world right now, let's just say of like, let's take out all the insecurities, would I
Mhm.
say yes or no to the opportunity? That's how I like to think about it now. So if it's like, if I get a negotiation with an employee or a vendor that says we deserve this, and if
Mhm.
I come from a place of scarcity, I'd probably be like, oh yeah, you probably do.
Yeah.
But if I come from a place of abundance where I say, I have achieved everything, I have enough, like I'm full of everything that we need, and I come from that place, I would probably be able to push back because I don't have
Mhm.
anything to lose.
Mhm. Mhm.
Versus, so I think it comes from a level of that like confidence, but also that manifestation, quote unquote, of like being abundant. And it's
Mhm.
a constant work in progress.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And sometimes scary.
Always scary. Always scary. Yeah. But that's why we do what we do.
That's true. It would
Yeah.
be boring otherwise.
I think it would be shallow otherwise too. I think
Yeah.
I want to live a life that's deep and depth
Mhm.
versus just like ticking the boxes. It's like
Mhm.
I just want to look back and make sure that I lived that deep life. Yeah.
Mhm. I'm curious, you mentioned you are hiring for 5 roles right now.
Yeah.
Um, what are like the most important things that you look for in hires from a characteristic standpoint?
Uh, One would be humility,
Mhm.
and especially if they come with a lot of experience, we want that humility to be coupled with experience and empathy because something that at least I want with our team is that that team member can actually grow and move up in the company versus we
Yeah.
hire someone and bring in and layer on top. So I've always optimized it more for like our staff to be able to rise. And so, but if and when, at least at this stage where we do need to actually hire some very senior roles, like we're probably looking for a chief of staff, we're looking for like either a director of integrated marketing or an integrated marketing manager,
Mhm.
they'll have to come with years of experience, but we don't want that to change the current culture of the company. So some things that we look for is that humility combined with empathy, combined with experience. And it's not an easy role. It really
Mhm.
isn't. As I'm sure you know, because all of your team members are that too. So that's that those three sort of pillars, I think, are kind of what we really look for. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Are there any questions that you ask in the interview process to learn more about somebody's empathy level? I'm always curious about that. There's a lot that you can, I guess, put down on paper, and then if you're doing them over Zooms, you can kind of maybe pick up on conversation dynamics. But I'm curious if there's like any specific questions that you found are really insightful for kind of unearthing somebody's level of empathy.
That is a really good question.
It's a tricky one. If I come up with one, I'll share it with you. I don't have one.
I think for what I typically do is actually just give an example of like a situation that has happened in the company where then like, what would you do? Like
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Joe has had an issue with Sarah for 2 weeks now about the same issue, and it's not delivering, it's not performing, yet they're communicating and they're great people individually. What would you do? So
mm-hmm,
that's probably how I would approach it, and then see like, A, did she try to set up a one-on-one individually? Did she do more of like an arbitration where we brought both people in? It gives me a sense at least of how they would approach the problem. And I think that's probably the answer that we're looking for versus there's no right or wrong answer. Yeah.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We do the third step of our interview process is a project, and it's
Mm,
a very, very high level brief. And we always try to tell people like it's intentionally high level because we
yeah.
want to we want to see how you process, and it's
Yeah.
much more about seeing how you think than the end result.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, I love that too. I love that. Yeah, we do projects, but I like being more vague about it like you are. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's great. Yeah.
Two more questions for you.
Sure.
One, you've built, not just one, but two successful e-commerce brands. And I'm curious, do you have an e-commerce brand that you admire most and why?
I mean, it's not even like their UX is fancy. I actually just like the brand.
Hmm.
Le Labo is one
Hmm.
of them. It's the company, and you're based out of Europe. They do like the fragrances. And I think the reason I really like them is like they stayed so true to the brand. And one thing that I'll never forget about the founders is like they never come out with products that customers ask them to come out with. They come out with products that give them joy, like the
Yeah.
founders themselves, because I think,
Hmm.
again, it starts from the top of that oxygen. And if they're not having fun, the team's not having fun, and the customers are going to feel that too.
Yeah.
And often I think sometimes with e-commerce, given how quick we get feedback from customers, and as you grow, how much feedback we get, it's hard to filter that out and actually stay true to your North Star about like what it is that you want to do and ultimately why customers came to you in the first place.
Hmm.
It's up to that vision and to be thinking 5 years ahead, not necessarily what the customer is telling you what to do.
Hmm.
And then I remember like the Dan Levy conversation at the EY Strategic Growth Forum. He was like we had the opportunity of meeting him, like 20 of us in this room. And one of them asked like, kind of like, how do you think Schitt's Creek became so successful? And he was saying that he focused on the best interest of the characters. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about Netflix. It wasn't about anybody else or the viewers. He didn't care. He's so Canadian like that. And he didn't even think he'd be successful. And I think that's why they became so successful, because he didn't care about what anyone said. And he focused on the best interest of the cast, the fake cast, right? But it's the vision that he had, I think, for what the best interest of the people were. And similarly, I think that needs to be with the best interest of the company and our team and the product ultimately, and like the vision for what that is, not what the customer is saying. It's so easily being swayed, but like, and I struggle with that too, but ultimately we need to be innovators, not followers.
My last question. I'm curious. So we're nearing the end of the year. Is there anything, or is that like one thing that you've picked up on in the last year that you're going to carry with you, whether inside or outside the office into 2022?
I'm always working on this, I think, for myself personally, but I think it's always just like, I think it's still hard, but not caring what people think, I think is like a big one.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a few. There's like not caring what people think. Two is not letting people make me feel small, because I think that is a unfortunately reality of how I look and who I am. We still get boxed into this Asian female demographic, and we're constantly kind of looked at small. And I'm tired of that, frankly. And going into next year, I'll be even more fiery about that. And then third, I think, is continuing to invest back. I think given how busy this last 2 years have been in my whole entrepreneur journey, I want to be able to give back. And I think the best way I can do that is to help other female Asian or not Asian founders, though, raise capital, get capital, invest in the founders, work with them, have calls with them. And so I'm proud that like I've invested personally in about 4 different companies just this last year. Not big checks, but enough that like it helps them, and then have calls with them on a monthly basis. And so
Very cool.
that's been actually just really, really great for me personally. And it helps to breathe in good oxygen, I think, too, because with COVID, it's been hard to kind of have that community element. And so that's something I'm working on too. Yeah.
A more fiery Shizu in 2022. That's what I want to be around. It's hard to imagine. I'm going to tell my team you said that. They're going to be pumped. They'll believe it though. They'll believe it.
Oh, so pumped. But I also think I need to hire for an extension of Shizu, so that chief of staff role, and probably getting myself a little bit actually out of the day-to-day, and maybe even out of the day-to-day of the tough and apothecary conversations too.
Never.
I mean, you know what I mean, though. You know what I think we need to scale ourselves, and that's actually one of the hardest roles. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the time.
Of course. Actually, I want to ask you, but you're recording still.
I'll stop recording and then pepper me with questions. Thank you for joining.
Absolutely.